The Cage Without Bars, a Socratic Dialogue by Alaric Emrys, featuring Socrates, the objective philosopher, offering questions that reveal the unseen. Observer, a seeker of understanding, questioning the nature of life within the system. Observer 2, a voice of doubt and curiosity, challenging and exploring what is revealed. Prologue. Observers.
Socrates, may I ask you a question about the people of Earth?
Socrates.
Of course, ask anything.
Observer.
Why do so many of them live with such tension, exhaustion, and anxiety, even when they are not at war or in immediate danger?
Socrates.
Because they are at war with a system they cannot name, and in danger from conditions they have been trained not to question.
Observer.
What kind of system do you mean?
Socrates.
One built not on overt force, but on invisible rules. Rules that shape behavior, restrict movement, and mold belief without being seen as cages.
Observer.
So they are not physically imprisoned, yet you say they live in a cage?
Socrates.
Precisely. The cage is not made of iron, but of incentives, narratives, debt, and conditional freedoms. It is psychological, social, economic. Its genius is that most within it believe they are free.
Part 1. The Architecture of the Cage. Observer.
But how can someone believe they are free when they suffer so clearly?
Socrates.
Because they are told that their suffering is a result of their own inadequacy, not the system itself. If they fail, it is because they didn't try hard enough. If they succeed, it is framed as proof the system works. Thus, they internalize the blame and protect the very structure that exploits them.
Observer.
And what does this system claim to be?
Socrates.
It claims to be capitalism, a system where the free market rewards value creation, competition, drives innovation, and prosperity is earned through effort.
Observer.
Is that not what capitalism is?
Socrates.
In its pure form, yes, but the system they live under is not that. It retains the name, but not the function. It rewards proximity to power, not productivity. It concentrates wealth in the hands of those who own assets, not those who build or serve.
Observer.
Then what is it, if not capitalism?
Socrates.
It is crony capitalism fused with central banking, a form where capital flows not by merit, but by access, where the rules are written to favor incumbents, and where the value of money itself is distorted by those who control its issuance.
Observer.
Who controls the money?
Socrates.
A small set of institutions, central banks, who have the power to create currency and determine interest rates. They decide when money is created, who receives it first, and how it circulates through the economy.
Observer.
But is this happening by accident? Could it just be the way the system evolved?
Socrates.
That is what many believed, until it was stated plainly. In 2005, Citibank sent a letter to its wealthiest clients explaining that the United States was no longer a democracy, but a plutocracy. They did not fear saying it, because they knew their audience benefited from it. And in the years that followed, policies and markets moved to reflect exactly that insight.
Observer.
So it's not just that this is happening, it's that some people have known all along?
Socrates.
Yes, and what's more, they are not merely beneficiaries. They are authors. It is not a machine left to run on its own. It is engineered, updated, and defended.
Observer.
And who receives this money first?
Socrates.
Those closest to the financial system. Large banks, corporations, investors. They receive new money before prices adjust. By the time it reaches the public, its value has been eroded through inflation.
Part 2. The System of Extraction. Observer.
But why would they choose a system that causes inflation?
Socrates.
Because inflation is not a flaw of the system, it is a feature. When new money is printed and given to them first, they are able to buy real assets, land, stocks, resources, before prices rise. By the time inflation reaches the public, the wealthy already own what the public now has to buy at higher prices. Their wealth inflates while everyone else's savings devalue.
Observer.
So those who work and produce get weaker money?
Socrates.
Yes, their labor is real, but the value they are paid is diluted. They create value. Others extract it.
Part 3. The illusion of choice. Observer 2.
Forgive me, Socrates, but isn't it also possible that some people simply make poor choices? That not all suffering can be blamed on systems?
Socrates.
An important question. And yes, individual choices matter. But I ask you, how free is a choice when it is made under the pressure of fear, debt, misinformation, or the illusion of scarcity?
Observer 2.
But many have risen from poverty to success. Does that not prove the system allows for upward mobility?
Socrates.
A few seeds sprouting in a barren field does not mean the soil is fertile. It means the exceptions are used to validate the rule. But even those who succeed often do so at great cost to their spirit, their health, or their integrity, and often by serving the system, not by changing it.
Observer.
So you're saying that even those who thrive are still within the cage?
Socrates.
Yes, for what is wealth if it requires forgetting one's neighbor? What is success if it means perpetuating the suffering of others?
Observer 2.
But surely not all wealth is exploitative.
Socrates.
No, wealth earned through creativity, care, and contribution is noble, but wealth sustained through rent, manipulation, and gatekeeping is not. The system rewards the latter more reliably than the former.
Observer.
And who decides which kind of wealth is rewarded?
Socrates.
Those who benefit most from the rules decide which actions are rewarded. They shape the game in their image and call it merit.
Observer 2.
But the people vote, they protest, they speak out. Are you saying all of that is meaningless?
Socrates.
Not meaningless, but carefully contained. A system that allows for dissent, without risk to itself, is not threatened by disagreement. It depends on it to appear open.
Observer 2.
Then what is the boundary? At what point does the system feel threatened?
Socrates.
When clarity emerges, when people stop arguing and begin seeing, when they no longer mistake discomfort for failure, when they question not just what happens, but the architecture behind why it happens again and again.
Observer.
So you're saying even outrage has been absorbed?
Socrates.
Especially outrage. The system feeds on emotion without direction. Anger scattered becomes noise. Anger clarified becomes vision. Vision is dangerous.
Observer 2.
But what of responsibility? If all is structure, where is personal agency?
Socrates.
Responsibility is sacred, but it must be rooted in truth. A man who drowns in a whirlpool is not weak for failing to swim. He is in the wrong environment. Responsibility begins not by blaming oneself for the current, but by recognizing it.
Observer.
Then it is possible to be responsible and still acknowledge the design?
Socrates.
More than possible. It is essential. Only those who see the system clearly can navigate it with integrity. Those who refuse to see it are not responsible. They are loyal to an illusion.
Observer 2.
But isn't this perspective itself a kind of illusion? A lens that casts everything as rigged.
Socrates.
It would be if it sought to explain everything, but it does not. It only seeks to illuminate that which is deliberately obscured. It does not negate personal experience. It gives it context.
Observer.
So what then? What follows from this seeing?
Socrates.
Another question, a better one, but not yet asked.
Observer.
Socrates. What role does education play in all of this?
Socrates.
A foundational one. For a system like this to endure, it must begin shaping the mind before the mind can question.
Observer 2.
But education is supposed to empower people, isn't it?
Socrates.
That depends on what you mean by education. True education teaches one how to think. The system's version teaches one how to obey.
Observer.
Are you saying the school system doesn't teach critical thinking?
Socrates.
It teaches conformity, masked as intelligence. memorization over questioning, performance over understanding. And above all, it teaches that success means doing what you're told, for the reward of approval and a future that is never guaranteed.
Observer 2.
But isn't a diploma still useful? Doesn't it open doors?
Socrates.
Once, perhaps, but each year the value of that paper goes down, while the cost to obtain it goes up. The price of education rises, but the education itself does not improve.
Observer.
Then what are people paying for?
Socrates.
Access, status, a badge of legitimacy, not skill, not insight. They are paying to not be excluded from a rigged game.
Observer.
And if they can't pay?
Socrates.
Then they borrow and enter a lifelong debt. Most borrowers will carry their student loans into old age. Some die before repaying them. This is not education. It is economic initiation into wage servitude.
Observer 2.
That sounds extreme. Surely not everyone is trapped.
Socrates.
Not everyone, but the average borrower now pays for decades. And even those who repay carry the weight of what was lost: years, freedom, and the illusion of choice.
Observer.
And what do they actually learn?
Socrates.
They learn a myth, a national faith, a doctrine of American exceptionalism. They are told their nation is the freest, the fairest, the most advanced, regardless of evidence. It is not education. It is cultural religion, dressed in the robes of scholarship.
Observer 2.
But is that really harmful?
Socrates.
When people are taught not to question their foundations, they will build their lives on illusions, and when the illusion cracks, they will blame themselves.
Observer.
So education doesn't just fail them, it prepares them to accept failure as their fault.
Socrates.
Precisely, and the deeper tragedy is that many brilliant, kind, capable minds lose their fire in this system. It does not fail by accident. It works exactly as intended.
Observer.
What does this do to a person? To be shaped like this from childhood?
Socrates.
It teaches them to see the world through borrowed eyes. It tells them from their earliest moments that value comes from performance, not presence, from compliance, not curiosity.
Observer 2.
But surely people can resist that. Can't they rise above it?
Socrates.
Some do, but many are too tired before they begin. They are told they must work harder, when in truth, they are dragging chains invisible even to themselves. You do not see the weight of the water when you were born swimming in it.
Observer.
So it's not that people lack potential, it's that their minds are worn down?
Socrates.
Yes, the system succeeds by making most people feel that their failure is personal. They don't see that it's systemic, and this guilt, this shame, drains the will to resist.
Part 4. The machinery of compliance. Observer 2.
But why is the system so good at doing this?
Socrates.
Because it has refined its methods for generations. It does not crush through force. It wears down through routine, through the slow erosion of joy, curiosity, and autonomy.
Observer.
Like sandpaper on the soul?
Socrates.
Precisely, it convinces children that grades measure worth, that busyness means virtue, that silence means respect, that exhaustion means success.
Observer 2.
And if they accept that?
Socrates.
Then they become adults who mistake burnout for accomplishment, who feel guilt when they rest, who cannot name their needs without shame, and who believe that freedom is dangerous because they were only ever trusted with obedience.
Observer.
And the system calls this preparation for life?
Socrates.
No, it is preparation for servitude, but they call it life, so that no one dares ask what else it could be.
Part 5. Betrayal and awakening. Observer.
That's why it's so hard to succeed. Because the system wasn't made for people to thrive. It was made for them to survive just enough not to revolt.
Socrates.
And that is why it succeeds, not because it lifts people up, but because it teaches them to kneel and call it standing.
Observer.
Socrates. This is more than failure, it feels like betrayal.
Socrates.
It is. And the wound is not just in what was taken, but in the realization that what you trusted was never safe to begin with.
Observer 2.
But people think the system has flaws, not that it was made to harm them.
Socrates.
That is its most effective deception, to pose as neutral, to say, we tried our best. But what if the goal was not your thriving, but your utility?
Observer.
Are you saying people are raised for use?
Socrates.
Yes, they are cultivated not to flourish, but to function. Trained not to think, but to produce. Not to create, but to comply. They are bred, from childhood, for extraction.
Observer 2.
Extraction. Of what?
Socrates.
Of energy, of labor, of attention, of time, of creativity, of trust. The very essence of a human being. Channeled into machines they do not own, for outcomes they do not choose, in exchange for just enough reward to prevent collapse.
Observer.
So the mind, the body, the spirit, they're all farmed?
Socrates.
Yes, and because it is not done with whips and chains, but with diplomas and slogans, it feels like freedom until you question it.
Observer 2.
No wonder people break down. How could anyone survive that and not feel violated?
Socrates.
That is the hidden grief beneath modern life. A person may spend decades giving themselves to a system, believing it flawed but fair, only to wake one day and see that it was not flawed but false.
Observer.
That's why it's so hard to wake up. Because you don't just lose illusions, you lose trust in your own life.
Socrates.
And yet, this is the beginning of sanity. To grieve the betrayal is not weakness. It is the first breath outside the cage. It is what the system fears most. Not anger, not noise, but awakened sorrow, because it cannot be reasoned back to sleep.
Observer 2.
But wouldn't it be easier to believe it's just broken?
Socrates.
Easier, yes. But that lie is what allows it to continue. If you believe the wolf is merely clumsy, you'll never stop feeding it.
Observer.
Socrates. What happens to the ones who see it?
Socrates.
Many of them try to help. They speak, they warn, they try to lift the veil. But often they are met with fear, not gratitude.
Observer 2.
Fear. But why? Isn't truth a gift?
Socrates.
Only to those ready for it. To others, truth is an intruder, an offense, a threat to the fragile scaffolding of their hope.
Observer.
So the ones who wake up are treated like enemies?
Socrates.
Yes, not by the system alone, but by those still trying to succeed within it. The awakened are seen as dangerous, even ungrateful. They are accused of bitterness, of laziness, of rebellion. But what they carry is not contempt. It is clarity, and that clarity is unbearable to those still invested in the dream.
Observer 2.
That's cruel. To be punished for trying to help?
Socrates.
It is one of the deepest wounds a person can endure, to be destroyed not by your enemies, but by those you most wanted to save.
Observer.
Because to them, you're not a liberator. You're a threat to the life they've sacrificed so much to believe in.
Socrates.
Precisely. If they accept your truth, they must grieve everything they've given away in vain. Their time, their obedience, their dreams. And that grief is too great for most to face.
Observer 2.
So they fight to protect the very thing that's harming them?
Socrates.
Yes, and in doing so, they turn against anyone who might wake them.
Observer.
That's why the system survives. It doesn't need to silence every dissenter. It teaches the people to do it themselves.
Socrates.
The cage is strongest, not because it is hidden, but because it is defended by those inside it.
Observer.
But what of the ones who wake up and still try to succeed, ethically, without manipulation or harm?
Socrates.
They become the system's favorite kind of prey.
Observer 2.
Why? Shouldn't they be celebrated?
Socrates.
No, they threaten the order not with rebellion, but with contrast. They prove it is possible to play differently, and so the system punishes them, not with force, but with disregard.
Observer. Disregard. Socrates.
Yes, they are ignored, undervalued, treated as naive or foolish. Their refusal to exploit others makes them invisible in a game that rewards exploitation.
Observer 2.
And the others in the cage?
Socrates.
They see the awakened as the lowest caste, someone who does not win by the rules, yet still refuses to cheat. They are not just pitied, they are mocked.
Observer.
Because they chose integrity over advantage?
Socrates.
Yes, and in doing so, they reveal what others have sacrificed. Their presence reminds the others of their own compromise, and this cannot be forgiven.
Observer 2.
So they become the outcasts. Among the trapped?
Socrates.
Exactly. The system loves this, because now, even outside its official hierarchies, a caste system emerges. The obedient, the ambitious, the ruthless, and at the bottom, the ethical.
Observer.
And no one has to enforce it. The people do it to each other.
Socrates.
That is the genius of it. The awakened become scapegoats. Their failure is used as proof that ethics are useless. Their integrity becomes a cautionary tale, and thus the loop closes.
Observer 2.
So the system governs itself through shame.
Socrates.
Yes, through shame, mimicry, and hunger. And anyone who resists must either endure isolation or disappear.
Observer.
But still, some choose this path?
Socrates.
They do, not for reward, but because they have seen too much to go back.
Observer.
But if someone knows all of this, why don't they just do what everyone else does? Play the game. Take what they can.
Socrates.
Because once they see the truth, they can no longer pretend. To take from another is to become the very mechanism they've come to understand, and they cannot unknow what they now see.
Observer 2.
But isn't that just idealism? What good is it if they suffer for it?
Socrates.
It is not idealism, it is clarity. Imagine being locked in a cage and forced to fight others just to survive. One day, you see the bars. You realize this was never nature. It was design, a trap, an experiment, a theater of fear.
Observer.
And once you see that, you can't strike the others the same way anymore.
Socrates.
No, because you realize they are not your enemies. They are your mirrors. They are suffering under the same false sky, and attacking them would be like gnawing off your own arm to feed yourself.
Observer 2.
But the hunger remains, the lack, the threat.
Socrates.
Of course, but now you know. The hunger was manufactured. The lack was imposed. The threat was engineered to turn your gaze away from the architect and onto your fellow prisoner.
Observer.
So to harm them would be to betray yourself.
Socrates.
Yes, to become the thing that wounded you, and many choose to endure poverty, isolation, even scorn, rather than break the sacred knowing that no one was ever meant to live like this.
Observer 2.
That is why the system mocks them, because it cannot break them.
Socrates.
And because they expose the lie that cruelty is human nature. It is not. It is conditioning. And the awakened refuse the role they were assigned in that play.
Observer.
So what choice does a person have? Become like the system, or be broken by it?
Socrates.
That is the illusion the system offers. But the real question is not what you must do. It is who you are willing to become.
Observer.
Because I don't want to become what it requires. I could force myself. I could mimic it. But I'd feel dead inside.
Socrates.
Yes, you would walk, breathe, and speak, but it would not be you. It would be a version of you that has exiled the most sacred parts: compassion, wonder, peace, conscience.
Observer 2.
But doesn't everyone have to compromise a little to survive?
Socrates.
A little? Perhaps. But the system does not ask for a little. It asks for everything. And then it tells you that emptiness is adulthood, and numbness is maturity.
Observer.
That's what scares me, that staying in the cage will cost me more than leaving it ever could.
Socrates.
Because it will. The cage demands your obedience, your conformity, your joy, your presence. It lets you keep just enough to keep functioning, but never enough to feel alive.
Observer.
So I'd become a robot, efficient, polite, empty.
Socrates. And
And the system would call you successful, productive, normal.
observer.
But I'd know the truth. I'd know I gave up something sacred just to be accepted by something hollow.
Socrates.
And that knowing would haunt you more than poverty ever could.
Observer.
So it's not about how much I can get. It's about how much of myself I must lose to get it.
Socrates.
And that is the question the cage never wants you to ask.
Observer.
There's something deeper I'm starting to feel. It's not really the things people want, is it?
Socrates.
No, it never was. It is the feeling they believe the thing will bring. Safety, belonging, freedom, joy. That is what the heart longs for, not the tokens used to chase them.
Observer 2.
But why chase money then? Why the obsession?
Socrates.
Because the system has made every true experience of peace conditional upon currency. You must pay to rest, pay to live, pay to eat, pay to be left alone. So money becomes not a tool, but a tether to your humanity.
Observer.
And the cruelty is that it doesn't even work.
Socrates.
No, it makes life more comfortable, but not more meaningful. The wealthy discover this, but the poor are never allowed to believe it. They are kept just hungry enough to chase the illusion.
Observer 2.
So poverty is designed?
Socrates.
Yes, it is the system's whip, a punishment for non-compliance. And more than that, it is engineered through the removal of alternatives. You cannot simply grow food, build a home, live simply. Every means of self-sufficiency has been fenced off, licensed, regulated, or criminalized.
Observer.
So the cage is not just psychological, it's logistical.
Socrates.
Precisely. You cannot leave, not because you're not allowed, but because you are made to believe there is nowhere to go.
Observer 2.
And the ones who try?
Socrates.
Are called mad, or criminal, or lazy. The system mocks the idea of a simpler life because it cannot extract from those who no longer play.
Observer.
That's the greatest trick. Convincing people that joy is expensive, that peace must be earned, that freedom is selfish.
Socrates.
And that suffering is noble. That exhaustion is proof of worth. That security is always just one promotion away.
Observer.
But it's not. Because the chase was never meant to end. The system cannot afford for people to feel content. If they did, they might stop running.
Socrates.
And the machine would stop spinning.
Part 6. Psychological and logistical captivity. Observers.
Socrates. What separates someone inside the cage from someone outside it? Is it wealth, status, power?
Socrates.
No, it is none of those. A person may be wealthy and still imprisoned, and another may be poor and already free.
Observer 2.
Then what makes the difference?
Socrates.
Vision. One sees the structure and still believes in its promises. The other sees the structure and recognizes its illusion. That is the crossing.
Observer.
So freedom is a matter of perception?
Socrates.
Not only perception, but orientation. The person inside the cage still orients their decisions around approval, reward, fear, and belonging. As defined by the system, they may criticize the cage, but they still serve it.
Observer 2.
And the one outside?
Socrates.
The one outside knows that the cage is real, but no longer authoritative. They act according to a different compass. Inner truth, integrity, peace. Their sense of value no longer comes from compliance or control.
Observer.
But they still live within the system, don't they?
Socrates.
Yes, their body remains, but their allegiance does not. And that is why they are dangerous. because the system cannot fully capture someone who no longer believes its story.
Observer 2.
Then freedom is not escape, it's awakening.
Socrates.
Exactly. It is not the absence of struggle, it is the refusal to make the struggle sacred. The person outside the cage does not confuse survival with virtue. They do not mistake fear for responsibility. They do not measure their worth by productivity.
Observer.
So how can you tell who's inside and who's out?
Socrates.
Listen to what they protect. Listen to what they justify. Listen to what they fear losing. The one inside fears losing status. The one outside fears losing self.
Observer.
But Socrates, you say someone can be outside the cage even while they still live inside it. Isn't that just poetic language?
Socrates.
It would seem that way unless we separate what is often confused. There are two kinds of captivity: psychological and logistical.
Observer 2. Explain. Socrates.
A person is logistically inside the cage when they still depend on its systems to survive: money, housing, energy, law, approval. Nearly all of us remain within this structure in varying degrees.
Observer.
That's unavoidable, isn't it?
Socrates.
For now, yes. But a person is psychologically inside the cage when they still believe its narrative, that their value comes from productivity, that safety is something they must earn, that lack is their fault, and that the system is flawed but fair.
Observer 2.
So someone can be logistically trapped but mentally free?
Socrates.
Precisely. The psychologically free person understands the design. They see the bars, they see the rewards and punishments, but they no longer let it dictate their sense of meaning or identity.
Observer.
And that's what makes them dangerous?
Socrates.
Yes, because the system depends on psychological obedience more than physical control. It needs belief. It needs consent to maintain its illusion of legitimacy.
Observer 2.
But if someone still needs money, still pays rent, still plays the game, aren't they still complicit?
Socrates.
That is why this distinction is vital. No one escapes logistics entirely. But the psychologically free person engages the system strategically, not devotionally. They do not worship its rewards or fear its punishments. They no longer ask it for permission to feel whole.
Observer.
So psychological freedom is not perfection? It's detachment?
Socrates.
It is clarity. It is the difference between playing a role and believing you are the role, between surviving within a lie and believing the lie defines you.
Part 7. The Path to Freedom. Observer.
We've spoken about psychological freedom, but what about the logistical kind? What exactly makes someone logistically inside the cage?
Socrates.
Logistical captivity is the condition of being structurally dependent on systems you do not control and that do not care for your well-being. You rely on them for shelter, food, safety, movement, and survival.
Observer 2.
So, most people?
Socrates.
Nearly everyone. If you cannot house yourself without paying rent or a mortgage, if you cannot eat without wages or currency, if you cannot relocate without permission, if your health is subject to corporate policy, then you are logistically inside the cage.
Observer.
And what does it mean to be logistically outside the cage?
Socrates.
It means to no longer rely on those same systems for your basic needs. Not spiritually, not symbolically, mechanically. You are housed without rent. You are fed without purchase. You are protected without needing to appease those in power. You are no longer required to trade your time, your obedience, or your peace to survive.
Observer 2.
Is that even possible today?
Socrates.
Rarely, but it is possible. There are those who live off-grid, grow their own food, build their own shelter, and educate their children outside state curriculums. But they are few, and the system calls them fringe because their existence is a threat to the lie of necessity.
Observer.
But most people can't just move to the forest and build a cabin.
Socrates.
No, because even the forest has been claimed, the land is parceled, zoned, taxed, and surveilled, which is the clearest sign of how deeply the cage extends. It surrounds even the natural world.
Observer 2.
So is logistical freedom an illusion?
Socrates.
Not an illusion, but a reclamation. It is not given, it must be built, and it comes slowly, by degrees, through collective effort, through mutual aid, through shared land, knowledge, and tools. Alone, a person may struggle. Together, they may remember how freedom is made.
Observer.
So the path exists, but it's narrow, difficult, and not permitted by default.
Socrates.
Precisely. Logistical freedom is not a right in this system. It is an act of disobedience. But once it begins, even in fragments, the psychological cage begins to crack.
Part 8. Financial freedom and the illusion of escape. Observer.
Socrates, your vision of being outside the cage feels pure. But for most people, I think it's simpler. Being logistically free means being financially free.
Socrates.
Then speak that truth. Let us clarify what the cage truly guards.
Observer.
It's money. Everything else is decoration. The system doesn't care about your thoughts, your beliefs, your dreams. Not really. It controls your access to survival through money. If you can escape that, you stop being useful to it.
Socrates.
And in its eyes, usefulness is the only form of value.
Observer 2.
But people with money still live in the system.
Observer.
Yes, but they are no longer bound by it. They can say no. They can walk away. They can choose where to live, what to do, and whom to serve. That freedom is everything. It's not about excess. It's about escape from coercion.
Socrates.
Then you are right. In this system, financial freedom is the closest thing to logistical escape. It does not mean you leave the world, but that you stop being owned by it.
Observer.
The game isn't that you need money to live. It's that you need to keep chasing it. If you no longer have to chase it, the game has no hold on you.
Observer 2.
And the system is fine with that?
Socrates.
More than fine. It has anticipated it. It has baked in a tolerance for exceptions, because it knows that for everyone who escapes, 1,000 more will try and fail, blaming themselves instead of questioning the game.
Observer.
And the system still wins.
Socrates.
Unless those who escape remember the others, unless they build paths behind them, unless they stop measuring their worth by how many are beneath them and start asking who is still inside with no way out.
Observer.
But even if someone finds a path to freedom, the others in the cage won't always let them go.
Socrates.
Just as crabs in a bucket will pull back the one who climbs too high.
Observer 2.
Why would they do that?
Socrates.
Because freedom, in a world built on captivity, feels like betrayal. The one who escapes reveals the cage is real, and worse, that it might have been escapable all along.
Observer.
So instead of asking how, they ask, "Who do you think you are?"
Socrates.
Yes, the free one becomes a threat to their coping mechanism. If someone escapes, then suffering was never noble, obedience was never virtuous. The ladder they climbed might have always been leaning against the wrong wall.
Observer 2.
So they try to drag them back, not out of cruelty, but out of fear.
Socrates.
Out of terror. Because if one person leaves and does not return, the story collapses. And without the story, what justifies the suffering?
Observer.
The system barely needs guards. It has the wounded guarding each other.
Socrates.
Exactly. The bucket needs no lid. The crabs keep themselves in line.
Observer 2.
So even financial escape isn't safe?
Socrates.
Not if it's visible, not if it's done with dignity. The system will tolerate wealth, but only if it serves the system. The one who escapes with conscience and clarity threatens more than the rules. They threaten the mythology.
Part 9. The 3 paths forward. Observer.
Socrates. Can we pause here? There's too much to hold in my hands all at once. I need to see what's true. Clearly. I need to name it.
Socrates.
Yes. Let us gather what we now know not to despair, but to discern.
Observer 2.
Then what have we learned?
Socrates.
We've seen that the world most people live in is a cage, not of bars, but of engineered dependency. A cage maintained by economic systems that demand obedience in exchange for survival. A cage sustained by psychological conditioning, beginning in childhood, through school and culture. A cage enforced not just by elites, but by those within it, who shame, doubt, and resist anyone trying to leave. A cage that calls itself freedom, so that those inside never think to look for the door.
Observer.
And we've seen that there are two forms of captivity, logistical and psychological.
Socrates.
Correct. Psychological captivity is believing the system's myths, that success equals virtue, that struggle is proof of worth, that joy must be earned. Logistical captivity is being materially dependent on the system to live, through rent, wages, licenses, and debt.
Observer 2.
And freedom.
Socrates.
Freedom begins when psychological obedience ends, and logistical freedom, in our current world, is best defined as financial sovereignty, the ability to live without needing to trade your soul for a paycheck.
Observer.
But even those who escape are punished.
Socrates.
Yes, because they become proof that escape is possible. The system will tolerate wealth, but not clarity. It will reward ambition, but not awareness. It will let you rise if you never name the trap you climbed out of.
Observer 2.
So what options are left to someone who sees all this?
Socrates.
3 paths. 1. To return to sleep, to forget what was seen, to re-immerse in the system's rewards and rituals. 2. To awaken and isolate, to see clearly, but live silently, to survive on the margins. 3. To awaken and integrate, to remain awake even while living within the system, to walk the razor's edge of clarity and strategy, to help others see, not with force, but by example, and to protect one's spirit while building the conditions for freedom over time.
Observer.
None of those are easy.
Socrates.
No, but one of them honors the truth, and truth, once seen, has a way of burning through anything else you try to replace it with.
Observer 2.
So the real question isn't what's possible. It's, what do I want to become now that I know?
Socrates.
That is the question the cage cannot answer, and that is why it fears you asking it.
Appendix. Logical proof. A logical proof of the invisible cage. Premise 1.
Every human being is born into a world they did not design. You were born into pre-existing systems, economic, legal, educational, cultural. These systems were not made by you, and they were not made for you as an individual. You inherited them.
Premise 2.
Systems shape behavior. If a child is raised in fear, they learn to obey before they learn to question. If a worker is paid just enough to survive, they will often comply out of necessity, not agreement. Systems condition us, not through overt force, but through patterns of reward and punishment.
Premise 3.
Most people believe that if they follow the rules, they will be safe and eventually succeed. This belief is not foolish. It's taught. It is reinforced from childhood through education, media, religious frameworks, and workplace culture. Obedience is praised. Struggle is moralized. Hard work is exalted as both path and virtue.
Premise 4.
Yet the vast majority of rule followers experience stagnation, rising costs, emotional strain, and diminishing returns. Despite doing what they were told would work, working hard, staying out of trouble, earning credentials, many find themselves in debt, underpaid, anxious, and increasingly alienated. This is not due to a sudden lack of character across a population. It is evidence of systemic malfunction or design.
Premise 5.
Simultaneously, a small group of individuals gain wealth, comfort, and influence at exponential rates. These individuals often do not produce value in proportion to their rewards. They benefit from financial mechanisms that create money from money, not from work. They are closer to the levers of monetary creation, asset inflation, tax law, and regulatory exemption. They are not playing the same game.
Premise 6.
The system justifies this disparity by blaming the struggling and praising the successful. If you are poor, you must be lazy. If you are rich, you must be brilliant. If you question the rules, you are bitter. If you suffer quietly, you are strong. These narratives are not neutral. They are protective shields for those benefiting from the structure.
Conclusion 1.
Therefore, the system is not broken. It is functioning exactly as designed, to reward those closest to its mechanisms and to keep the rest compliant, self-blaming, and too exhausted to rebel.
Premise 7.
When those inside this structure begin to see the pattern, they are often met with ridicule, gaslighting, or emotional manipulation. They are told, life is hard for everyone, or you just need to grind harder, or stop playing the victim. This shames perception and rewards denial.
Premise 8.
Denial does not protect you. It only makes your suffering less articulate. To recognize the cage is not weakness. To feel anger, betrayal, or sorrow is not victimhood. It is awakening. True victimhood is when you suffer and are told you deserve it.
Conclusion 2.
You are not imagining things. You are not weak. You are not wrong to feel that something is off. You are simply beginning to see what the system was built to obscure.
Final statement.
You are not powerless. But your power begins not with rebellion and not with blind hope, but with clear vision. To see the cage does not mean you are trapped forever. It means you are no longer asleep inside it. And from that clarity, you can begin to move in ways the system never trained you to imagine.
Appendix 2. The ultimate TLDR. Too long didn't read.
Everything is energy. Everything you see, touch, consume, or create requires energy. Energy is the master resource behind food production, water purification and transportation, housing materials and construction, transportation and logistics, education delivery, medical infrastructure, heating, cooling, survival. If energy were abundant and free, so would be everything else.
By free, it means economically liberated from scarcity. The cost to maintain and operate nuclear/thorium reactors is so low relative to the energy output that it would be cheaper to simply fund their operation from public revenues than to meter and bill consumers. The economic surplus generated by abundant, low-cost energy would far exceed the operational expenses, making the traditional pricing model obsolete. Here's what's true.
We already unlocked abundant energy. We solved this problem decades ago. When nuclear fission was discovered, humanity crossed a threshold. Nuclear reactors produce immense amounts of power with minimal fuel. But the truth is even more shocking. The so-called nuclear waste isn't waste. It is still energetic fuel. New reactor designs already exist to use this waste as fuel, fully and safely. In fact, this waste alone could supply the entire electricity needs of the United States for the next 300 years. But they don't, because if energy becomes cheap and abundant, water scarcity disappears, desalination plants plus global pipelines. Food scarcity vanishes, hydroponics plus transport. Shelter scarcity collapses, automated construction. Time scarcity dissolves, machines handle drudgery. Medical scarcity ends, distributed energy powers global clinics. Education becomes universal. Connectivity and storage are energy-based. If energy is free, human freedom follows.
So why don't they?
Because the scarcity of energy is the master control lever. Keeping energy scarce means all other goods and services remain rationed. Fear and compliance remain high. Those who control energy control life itself. The global system of power depends on artificial scarcity of energy, which creates engineered scarcity of everything else, which creates dependence on the system, which ensures control over human life. There is no legitimate reason this world looks like it does. None. We do not live in a world of material scarcity. We live in a world of engineered deprivation. If you carry one thing away, let it be this. You are not in a world of natural limits. You are in a cage of artificial scarcity. The locks are energy, and the keys have been in our hands for decades. And when you see it, you can stop blaming yourself. You can stop blaming your neighbor. You can stop blaming the left, the right, the rich, the poor, the immigrant, the worker, the consumer, the next town, the next country. Because that was the plan all along, to keep you distracted, divided, and exhausted, fighting over scraps, while they control the energy that creates the scraps in the first place. It was never about your neighbor. It was always about energy,